The House will now have under consideration House Bill number 581. Good gentleman from District 7.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to suspend with any further reading of House Bill 581.
Without objection, the gentleman has the floor to open the debate.
We were doing so good this morning, just flying right through these bills, and then here I come. This bill ensures the individual rights of employees to not be discriminated against in the workforce because of their vaccination status in regards to COVID-19 or any other emergency use authorization vaccine. Okay. What I'm trying to do with this bill is to ensure the individual rights of the citizens of this state, that they do not have to give up those rights just to keep their job. This bill was a brainchild of mine when I saw what OSHA tried to do, forcing our companies to mandate the vaccine. And it's a little bit unfortunate that people have tried to turn this bill into a employee versus employer argument. If business has to mandate vaccines because of government telling them to, businesses in my area are going to go broke because the employees are going to walk. They are not going to get vaccinated with this untested, unproven vaccine. And I don't want to really get into the effectiveness or ineffectiveness of the vaccine, because that's not the issue. The issue is the individual rights of the employee to not be violated. So your first argument you're going to hear is businesses aren't doing this. Well, to my argument back, if businesses aren't doing this, then this doesn't affect them at all. Any business that is not mandatory vaccine, this bill has no consequences on them whatsoever. Your next argument is going to be, well, we shouldn't interfere with the rights of business and the employee. I agree. The problem with that argument is we've crossed that bridge a long time ago. I just got out of business committee where we went over rule after rule of what the state requires businesses to do through safety. I mean, so we told business, you can't hire an electrician unless he goes to school for 4 years and gets certified. So that employee goes to school for 4 years and he gets certified. And then we tell the business, okay, you can't hire somebody that doesn't do that. Okay, so now you've got people that have been working the better part of their adult life, and all of a sudden business comes along and say, hey, we know you did what we asked you to do, but now you have to stick a needle in your arm, or else you can't have a job. That just doesn't seem right to me. Once in a while, this body has to play referee. We muddied the water on both sides of this issue. So now all of a sudden, where we're supposed to be there first and foremost for the rights of the individual, we're going to leave the individual hanging because we're at the beck and call of big business. I don't want to get anybody in trouble with this bill, but it just doesn't seem right that we are going to allow this to happen when we have to be the referee in this. And I am a referee. I'm a basketball official. And it doesn't matter what call I make out there on the floor, 50% of the people are going to be upset. And that's kind of where this bill is. It doesn't matter what we do with this, there's going to be people upset. But it's my understanding that first and foremost, we are supposed to protect the individual citizen of this state. And that's all I'm trying to do. And in the process, I do believe that we are protecting the businesses of this state from any future intrusion by the federal government. I've got firefighters, I've got nurses, I've got all kinds of professions calling me, asking me for help. And I feel like I've let some of them down because this bill doesn't help nurses. I don't think it helps firefighters because the Supreme Court stepped in and tied our hands. I could have incorporated them. We could have sent this to the courts and spent a whole bunch more taxpayers' money fighting this, but I chose not to because I'm trying to help as many people as I can without stepping on businesses in the state any more than possible. But unfortunately, there's a very small percentage of businesses in the state that are abusing their ability to tell their employees what they can and can't do. That's where we have to step in and play referee. In every instance in the history of this country, when government has sat back and done nothing, it's turned out bad for businesses in the end. That's where we come up with all of the OSHA regulations. That's where the big unions got their foothold, was because the exploitation of business to its employees. And government didn't do anything about it until it was too late. I'm just trying to get out in front of it right now, help protect both the employee and the business. And I'll let you guys debate it. You tell me what you think, and we'll go from there.
Is there further debate? Item 29.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I cannot believe this is where we are in this body, that we are going to regulate private business and tell private business what they can do. I cannot believe that's where we are. When I left this body in 2010, I went back in part to save my job and was not successful doing it. The economy had plummeted. A lot of us in this body at the time were struggling or had spouses that were struggling. I started my own law practice. I found a law partner that I graduated law school with, and we went to work building that business. We borrowed money. We went into debt to get that business off the ground. We hired good people. Sometimes we hired people that didn't work out. We made a business plan. We started by doing any type of work we could bring in money for, but over time we specialized. We used that money to put our kids through college. We used that money to pay our mortgages. We used that money to help our employees put their kids through college and to pay their mortgages. It is when I pass from this earth and somebody does a memorial and I'm talked about, I hope that's what they talk about, is the business that I started, because that is one of the most important things that I've done. It is my property right. I built it. I own it. I didn't do it all by myself. I'm not suggesting that, but what I am suggesting is I know what works in those walls. When my clients come in, it's my responsibility to tell them, to let them know that they are safe, they're protected. When my employees come to work, they want a safe environment. Now, we've never had to tell any of our employees to get vaccinated. We have always found a way to work around that. But if it came to that, I'd do it. We have employees who go through their own health issues. And imagine this. Imagine an employee who's getting radiation treatment or chemo. A key employee in your business who comes to work every day and works as hard as they can to make your business successful, takes care of your clients. Don't you think you owe that to that individual to make sure they're safe when they're at the office? And you can tell me, oh, masks don't do this and the vaccine isn't helpful. For that individual to feel comfortable and be able to come to the workplace and do their job for you and help you make money and help them make money and to help your clients, they should feel safe. I can't believe this is where we are. Telling private businesses what they can do with their property rights. That is wrong. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there further debate? Down from 10.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate what the good gentleman from 7's doing here. By and large, in most situations, I don't think the employer should be requiring this. I appreciate the fact that it has a medical exemption. But I rather than do the back and forth of the question thing, I'd like to express a couple concerns, and hopefully the good gentleman can respond in his closing. One is the Americans with Disabilities Act, federal law. If I have an employee working for me in my law firm that has a bona fide disability, and as part of that bona fide disability, they are immunocompromised, and they request a special accommodation, I am bound by federal law to provide them with a reasonable accommodation. And the fact that I can't even ask if somebody's vaccinated would really put me in a bind. Second, the fact that an employer could not ask if somebody was vaccinated would require an employer who did have a situation like that or some other legitimate business reason to know, such as sending someone abroad where there were vaccination requirements, it would cause them to have to pay to test everybody all the time. And so that's a little too large of a burden. I would be more comfortable if there were a bit more nuance. And for those reasons, pending clarification in the good gentleman's closing, my intention is to vote no.
Thank you. Is there further debate? Gentleman from 11.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate what the good gentleman from 7 is trying to do. My daughter is immunocompromised. My son-in-law, her husband, is in a motorized wheelchair, immunocompromised. Now, with this bill, if they want to hire somebody to come into their house and they say, you know what, we would like you to be vaccinated, whether you agree it works or doesn't agree, that's their personal right to ask. But now what you're saying is, now you are going to make my daughter a criminal and punish her with a $1,000 fine. You know, I too can't believe that we've gotten to this point where we're going to do that to my daughter's individual liberty to ask. And so, yeah, I can't support this bill.
Is there further debate? Wave 25.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess for the same reasons that I have firmly and very strongly opposed what the federal government is trying to do on our businesses for vaccination mandates, I can't in good conscience do the same thing from the seat I have and the vote I have today on our business community in the state of Idaho. Idaho's an at-will work state. I don't want to change that. This really does focus the employer to keep that individual on its payroll regardless of their ability to perform their job. We have churches in the state of Idaho, ladies and gentlemen, who send missionaries overseas with a requirement to be vaccinated. We have a global agricultural community, a global business community here in Idaho that does business on a worldwide basis, who require many of their employees to be vaccinated to travel. Are we going to tell them they can no longer do that? That's a commerce issue. That's a business issue from my perspective. It also, from my perspective, adds additional regulatory burden to an already burdened business community in the state of Idaho. I think we need to let our businesses decide the safety protocols of their employees. We need to let them decide what works for them. We don't need the heavy hand of Idaho state government making that decision for our small businesses, for our large businesses, and for our global businesses. And in the name of liberty and freedom for those businesses today, I ask you to vote no.
Is there further debate? Gentleman 34.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to speak in favor of the bill. For all of you who have gone to your town halls, visited with your constituents, and had them come to you desperate for the ability to make their own medical decisions, exercise their own medical freedom and keep secure their own medical privacy. This is the bill. This is the one they're looking at to whether or not you're going to vote to protect them or to forget about their freedom and their privacy. Talking about the liberty of individuals, absolutely. Our Declaration of Independence, we all know the line that we are all endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The ability to work and provide for your family is that pursuit of happiness. What's often forgot in the Declaration of Independence is the very next sentence, though. The very next sentence says that to secure these rights, governments were instituted among men. We are part of that government today to secure and protect those rights. That's what we want to do. Employers, to say that we shouldn't get involved in the employer-employee decision, goodness, we do it all the time. We do it all the time. There are certain questions an employer cannot ask of prospective employees because it would be discriminatory. When we're talking about people's personal medical decisions, I think that falls into that category. That's what this bill does, is ensure that it's in that category. You can't ask a prospective employee if they're on birth control, can you? It might be relevant to that employer, knowing whether or not their employee is going to ask for medical leave or family leave at some point, but that cannot be asked because it might lead to discriminatory decisions. Here's another one we say cannot be asked. Families are being affected by this. I've met with hundreds gathered at a park in Idaho Falls worried about losing their job at INL. They've been working there happily for years, even decades. But all of a sudden, their contract is changing. It's a bit of regressive bargaining that after they've made this decision to make that career, or even the prior year to say we're going to go there instead of somewhere else because we like that job prospect, to suddenly change the rules and say if you don't get the shot, you're going to be fired. That's regressive bargaining. That's not the way this should operate. I've sat in the living room of an employee making that agonizing decision. I'm being asked to do something that either I'm philosophically, religiously, or medically opposed to, or lose the ability to provide for my family. That's an agonizing decision. Workers at hospitals, same thing. Workers at medical institutions, being put in the same position. Workers at Micron, we had some of them demonstrate on the steps last Friday. 36 families have lost their jobs. 36 families. That's turning over people's lives because of a mandate. And here's the key on this one, I think. First of all, actually, the biggest key is the freedom issue, liberty, and we're here to protect rights. Rights of individuals is as basic as it gets. But here's another key on this, is that no vaccine is perfectly safe. One's under emergency use authorization. There's no guarantee they're perfectly safe. Now, I don't need to even get into a debate on the safety and efficacy of vaccines to get to this next point. And the point is, where there's risk, there must be choice. You cannot force somebody into a risk that they don't know what's going to happen, especially under these circumstances when everything has just been turned over in the last, really, it's been barely over a year in terms of the vaccine decisions. Where there's risk, there must be choice. It's our job to protect liberty. This bill deserves your yes vote. I know a lot of Idahoans are watching how we vote on this today. Thank you.
Is there further debate? Good lady from 30.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To declare Rule 80, I'm a small business owner. Thank you.
Your declaration will be noted in the Journal. Gentleman from 9.
Thank you. I have a question for the good gentleman from 7.
Will the gentleman from 7 yield to a question?
The gentleman yields.
Gentleman yields.
Mr. Speaker, I'm wondering what the definition of, if there's a definition of employer anywhere, or what definition of employer we're using. For example, I want to hire one of the high school kids from my church to come over and do a little babysitting for a couple hours, and I give them $10, $12 an hour. Am I an employer?
Gentleman from 7.
Mr. Speaker, gentleman from 9, I am not an attorney with that kind of knowledge. I would assume, yes, it would be covered under that. But I can't answer that any more than that.
Thank you.
Is there further debate? Gentleman from 34.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just to debate the bill. I do appreciate the gentleman from 7 in bringing this forward and recognize his intent and pure of protecting our freedoms and our liberties. I don't disagree with that. I think all of us have that same goal in mind. The concern I have is placing government in between employers and employees. Whenever that happens, and I know it happens, but generally it doesn't turn out good. We talk about removing the freedom of choice from employees. I disagree with that. There is a choice involved here. And with the choice, there's consequences. Now, let me tell you a story, a personal story, where there's no choice. I grew up in a hard-working, blue-collared family. Twice during my growing up years, my dad received a pink slip. Many of you know what a pink slip is. He didn't have a choice. He was out of a job. Folks, I know what that implication is to families. I lived through it. We went through every form of welfare you can imagine. And I know the heartache between moms and dads and the impact it had on our family and others. And I recognize that in this situation. But folks, there are choices. Employees have a decision to make. Those are difficult decisions. I recognize that. But I'm a firm believer that when we allow employers and employees to work this out amongst themselves, it is the very best solution, not when we intercede with or interject with government. Now, I want you to think back at the beginning of this pandemic and when this thing blew up of businesses mandating the vaccine. It was a hot topic across the state. Every news outlet calling our legislators, and we do this knee-jerk reaction of, yes, we got to stop this. It's not right. Now fast forward to where we're at today. We don't hear much about it because it's working its way out. Now, I know that there's been families that have been impacted. But I take issue somewhat with when I hear hundreds or thousands. I think that's a little exaggerated. Because the folks that I visit with and the employers that I visit with, they're saying, man, we got 6,000 employees. Well, how many were impacted? Now, less than 100. In one case, it was less than 30. And even at that, folks, we don't know the full reason why. There could have been other issues or other impacts that employee left. I'm voting no against this for the simple reason that it is an employer and employee issue. And if I were you, I would want to be me too and vote no. Thank you.
Is there further debate? Lady from 35.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I also want to take you way back to about 2 years ago We were humming along. The ADA, as was mentioned, Americans with Disabilities. The HIPAA laws were sacrosanct. We did not have to tell people anything about our medical records. So that was just a short time ago that those were held to be very private. And then it was like overnight, now we have to tell that. And so as the good gentleman from 29 said, I can't believe this is where we are either, but for the totally different reason. And I don't feel comfortable sharing my medical information with others. And people have died. I totally realize that. And it is painful when loved ones pass. It seems like about 2 years ago also, we didn't have flu anymore. It was just COVID. And that's kind of strange to me. As was mentioned here in debate, we don't worry about weight or diet, apparently, in asking questions or having people that we employ. For just 2 examples, and that's private as well. I mean, how far does this go? And I, too, have met with hundreds of people in rallies, emails, and such that are asking us to stand and protect privacy rights. This isn't to do with businesses, which we license, we do all kinds of things, telling businesses what to do, actually. And this is a point where we need to protect our privacy because the government keeps encroaching on our privacy. So I ask you to think about all of our families in our districts, the people that are begging us to stop mandating, to give them back the freedom that we had just 2 years ago. Thank you.
Gentleman from 3.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, this is an issue that's near and dear to my heart. You know, in the last 2 years, I've witnessed things that I never, ever would have dreamed I'd witness take place in this country. It started when the government said some businesses are not essential. Was government involved in that? They injected themselves into this. Then we've also witnessed a government get between a doctor and his patient. We've never, ever seen anything like that before in this country. My friends, government is involved. We need to involve ourselves in this argument because we have to protect our citizens and our businesses, and I think this bill will go a fair ways to doing that. Thank you.
Is there further debate? Lady from 14.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know that we need to weigh in on whether vaccines are safe or not. I don't know that we need to weigh in if vaccines are effective or not. But what I do believe that we need to weigh in on is whether discrimination based on vaccine status is justified or not. And I would say it is not. It is not, and in the workplace, it should not be used as a piece of discrimination. And our vaccine status is a matter of privacy. That kind of discrimination should absolutely be prohibited. And particularly in a state like ours that values our freedoms and our liberties, there is no place for a vaccine mandate like this. Thank you.
Is there further debate? Lady from 31.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, I think an important consideration when we talk about whether these kinds of mandates are appropriate on the part of an employer is what purpose that vaccination serves. Some of you may remember that I shared in our November meeting that my son worked on the vaccine trials down in Salt Lake City. those trials showed that the vaccine was effective at mitigating symptoms. Their symptoms were less severe. That's what the initial study found. The study did not find that being vaccinated prevented them from spreading. The whole argument, the whole public health argument or workplace health argument turns on the question of whether the vaccine actually protects other people or whether it simply benefits the individual who chooses to be vaccinated. I would submit to you that there is not conclusive scientific evidence anywhere to be found that the vaccine will prevent someone from transmitting COVID to others. And in the absence of any kind of guarantee that requiring one person to be vaccinated is going to protect someone else, there's no justification for a mandate. This is a personal health decision. So let's talk about business. You know, a business owner is an individual, and we're elected by individual citizens to represent the interests and rights of individual citizens. Business has its role. There are things that are appropriate in a contract between an employer and an employee. But business is not in the position to dictate to an individual what is in their best interest medically. Here we have business interjecting itself between an individual and their healthcare provider. And I have talked to more than one person since we began dealing with this issue in our state who found themselves between a rock and a hard place because their doctor said, you are immune compromised and should not get the vaccine. And the employer said, you must get the vaccine. How fair is that? We should not have businesses inserting themselves into the middle of the relationship between an individual and their doctor when they are making private health decisions. And we've also heard some things about the ownership that an individual has over the business that they've created. Yes, a business is someone's personal property. They own that business. They have a right to make decisions about their business. But I'll tell you what, as an individual, my most fundamental property is my person. There was a time when the people in the early colonies were tired of the British invading their homes and trampling on their property, and they declared that their home was their castle. If my own person is not my castle, I don't have a refuge. So I would urge your support for this legislation. Employer mandates are inappropriate, and this legislation is much needed and long overdue.
Is there further debate? Gentleman from 35.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to debate on this. And I appreciate the good gentleman and his intentions from 7. And I appreciate those that he's talked to. I'd just like to put a little different wrinkle on this, if I may. The good lady from 31 mentioned something that I think is probably true. Symptoms are less severe. And when I think of that and business owners that I work with, I don't have any business owners that I know of that are mandating vaccines. Soft mandates, maybe they would give a bonus if you got vaccinated, or they would give a day off if you got vaccinated. But no one that I know of is mandating it. This is a tough time to mandate vaccines. 2% unemployment, key individuals. You can't afford to lose an employee in this marketplace. It's a tough time to mandate. Like my good friend next to me said, a lot of these businesses have worked this out. They've offered exemptions for religious exemptions. They've offered exemptions for medical exemptions. One thing you need to know, besides me banging on the microphone, is that a lot of these, there is the ability for the employer to know medical information. It's called a HIPAA agreement. Employers' names on that agreement can know of the conditions of health for that business, especially in a self-funded health insurance plan. Many employers have noted the correlation between vaccinations and time in the ICU. They've noted that when someone is vaccinated, they only spend maybe a day in the hospital, versus when someone's not vaccinated, they spend maybe 5 to 10 days in the hospital. So the decision to have an employee vaccinated that maybe makes $50,000 a year and spends a day in the hospital is $30,000 versus someone in the hospital that's $250,000, maybe to have your employee vaccinated might be a business decision. Are we going to take that decision away from a business owner? We just went over rules in business. We spent hours going over rules. We eliminated 30% of the regulations and rules in that rule book. And now we're going to add one more. I would hope you see a red light on this bill. Let employers work this out. It will be just fine. They don't need us to tell them what to do to make money. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there further debate? Lady from 33.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Friends, I am going to bring a different perspective. We are talking about government involvement. And my question to you, because I agree, I can't believe that we are having this conversation, actually. So my question is, what is the proper role of government? And that takes us back to how was this government formed? And when we consider how the government was formed, our forefathers spent tons of time looking over all the governments that had preceded them. And the governments that had preceded them had primarily been based in governments that gave power to the individual, such as a king or whomever, where the power rested at the top. And they recognized that with the power resting at the top, that it hurt the individuals. They literally recognized that. They looked at all governments. They were well read. Obviously, John Locke played a lot into their thinking process as he talked about the individuals. When John Locke wrote, he taught I'm going to forget, treaties of, anyway, 400 times he referenced the Bible and the importance, essentially, of the individual. So my question is, as we're talking about this, we're getting a little confused on our hierarchy of rights. On the hierarchy of rights set forth by the Declaration of Independence. And remember, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution are helpmates. They go together. They are not to be separated. On the hierarchy of rights rests the individual. I forget where it talks about business. Sorry, being a little sarcastic. But it is the individual of whom we have been told that our responsibilities as government is to protect the rights of the individual. In protecting the rights of the individual, I do believe that the conversations that we've been having, actually we get to that point of things being able then to be worked out in the business. As I think about a couple other things that were mentioned, let me just take a scenario. I also feel that we as Americans, in many ways, we're starting to abdicate our responsibilities, and we start to worry about all of these little scenarios that may or may not occur at work, and we start creating scenarios where we can't really protect the rights of the individual. You know, at my work years ago, we had a family that wanted to sign up, and they had 2 children who were absolutely big-time death-prone to peanuts. And they wanted to become, one of the areas over which I see includes the preschool and the nursery. And they wanted to be able to come, and they wanted their safety guaranteed. And you know what I said? I said, I actually can't guarantee their safety. Because I have no idea if Johnny just came in and he happened to have a peanut, or he has leftover residue from peanut butter sandwich on his hands, and the decision was made that, you know, we could do our best, but I don't think we can protect Johnny. This may not be the best place, even though we'd like it to be. And I guess my point there is that at some point we also have to stand up and not abdicate our own personal responsibilities, because we do have those, and if it requires that we stay home, or now the way it's working with employers, we've been told how great this is because we realize that we can keep employers home and they can work from home. If we need to do that, then we do that. But friends, I know some of you are already planning to vote the other way, but just let me take you back to our own history. Our Declaration of Independence, Constitution, forefathers, it was about the individual. And so, the good gentleman, in bringing this, I appreciate that effort. Somewhere we've gone astray, and I would like to get back to the individual. And I'd hope that we can help with that. Anyway, thank you.
4.
Just a question of the bill sponsor.
Will the gentleman yield to a question?
The gentleman yields.
Gentleman yields.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And good gentleman, I've read through this, and I think I'm reading it correctly, but it may be a point of clarification. This is specific. Is this bill specific to a vaccine made available under an emergency use authorization? Is that what limits this bill?
That was...
From 7.
Speaker, yeah. That was the intent, yes.
Is there further debate? Good lady from District 18.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To debate against the bill.
Have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill flies counter to everything this body has done in the last couple of years since I've been here. As a Democrat, I really should be embracing this. I can't think of a better bill that, one, empowers employees, but also provides additional protections to a new class of individuals, adding into it an employee protection fee. What I find even more bizarre is that this bill flew out of Business Committee, a committee where we have spent the last 4 years I've been there doing everything we can to eliminate red tape. Idaho actually has embraced this. This is our least regulated state in the nation, and everyone here in this body uses that in part of their campaigning, as part of our discussions out in our communities, and as part of our support for our local businesses. If this bill really did want to protect everybody's body autonomy, why are we exempting certain employees? We're exempting medical employees. We're exempting those who work for federal government. If we really cared about our state's body's autonomy, our constituents' autonomy, why are we providing those little exemptions?
Gentleman, our good lady from 31, what's...
Yeah, I just feel that we're kind of walking a close line here in terms of motivations.
All right. To be honest, I was on the phone. I didn't know what the good lady said. She has heard what you've said, and I'm sure she's going to take that into account as she proceeds in her debate. And I apologize. I'll stay more focused.
I'll stay focused.
You'll quit calling me on the phone, okay?
Let's go back. But more importantly, what this bill is really going to do, it's going to handcuff our local businesses. This is going to add additional red tape, the very tape in which we spend all of our time trying to remove. It's opposite of supporting actual local businesses. I cannot think of another bill, quite frankly, that is going to determine who you can and cannot hire, who you cannot or keep on staff. In addition, it provides an extra employee protection fee. So should that employee feel whatever that they are being discriminated against, they can now charge that employer that $1,000. I don't know of any other protected class that has that ability to add that additional employee protection fee. Our local businesses, sure enough, they're suffering, and they are struggling. In the last couple of years, it's been pretty rough. We should be doing more to empower them to be doing their jobs and to be able to do the things that they need for their business to continue. We shouldn't be adding more additional barriers. I'm going to stand with my businesses, both the local and the large ones. I'm going to stick by them as they make the tough decisions on who they can and cannot hire, who they should and shouldn't keep on staff, because it's about their bottom line. We should not be advocating for additional red tape for our small local businesses to succeed in Idaho, and it's exactly what this does. We're telling our local businesses that they can't make the decisions in their own local communities that are better for their own ability to continue. I want my small businesses to succeed. I want my large businesses to succeed. And I want to give them the tools and mechanisms to do it. This does the complete opposite. I ask for your red light and ask that we do not add additional burdens and additional red tape on our employees, our employers. Thank you.
Is there further debate? Good gentleman from District 21.
Mr. Speaker, I stand again today to support individual rights. I'd like to think that really at the core of my being, I am a huge proponent of entrepreneurship, free market enterprise. I lived it. I grew up that way. I got to where I am, I think, by espousing those values. However, 2 times in my life, I've formally sworn an oath to the Constitution of the United States. Once was in 1983 when I joined the United States Army, and once was a year ago, December, when I joined this body. And when I swore an oath to that Constitution and the Bill of Rights that it contains, that was a bill of individual rights. And when I swore that oath to the Constitution, I meant it. I meant to abide by what that paper, that document stands for. And so in swearing an oath to the Constitution, it was an oath to that Constitution, not the corporation. And so as much as I am a free market capitalist and espouse entrepreneurship, if push comes to shove, my default position is to support the rights of the individual. Throughout our history, we've had relationships that were sacrosanct. You know, the spousal privilege, attorney-client privilege, and it used to be the doctor-patient relationship. I mean, those were 3 relationships that were, like I said, sacrosanct. And now we're finding ourselves with businesses bisecting that doctor-patient relationship. And earlier I got the sense that we were being a bit dismissive of the efficacy of some of the protocols. Well, really, the efficacy is really what matters. You know, forcing someone to get a shot that does have the potential to cause long-term, lifelong, life-changing ramifications. We're seeing those individuals testify. We were at the Healthcare Freedom Symposium Saturday, and we met some of those individuals who've had their lives turned inside out by vaccinations in this case. And when there is risk, it's been stated before, when there's risk, there needs to be choice. And again, if there's a position to be had, I'm going to default to the individual rights. It's been brought up about the efficacy and hospitalization rates and things. The stats, stats can say anything. The shortness of a hospitalization stay isn't necessarily related to the shot. They are not even testing immune response. They're not testing whether or not someone had the antibodies before being given the shot. I said it yesterday. I had COVID, had no symptoms. If I got the shot now, they're going to claim that it was the shot that was the reason for me being healthy and not going into the hospital. But I would suggest that it was because I acquired natural immunity and lived a lifestyle that made COVID irrelevant to me. So we can sit here and dance around all these statistics, and we can justify corporate behavior, other people making decisions for us, but we can sit here and analyze those stats, and I can spend all afternoon here going through and eviscerating many of the things that you're going to be hearing about the efficacy rates and stuff. We heard in Health and Welfare Committee, one of the hospitals was averaging 125 people a day in a largely fully vaxxed population.
Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from 11.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I appreciate the good gentleman's testimony. We seem to be drifting far afield from whether this bill should
be honest, gentlemen, I was starting to feel that myself,
Okay.
so if you'll bring it back.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Again, it was argued earlier that efficacy was not pertinent here. I would suggest that it really is pertinent, and 125 people out of a hospital employee per day in a fully vaxxed population speaks to maybe the ineffectiveness of mandates. And so when we are seeing those kind of results, maybe we need to rethink the policies. And if we have core principles, like I would like to think I do in this matter, my position is going to default to supporting the individual right with the consultation of their doctor to make their own health care decisions.
Thank you. Is there further debate? Good gentleman from District 13.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To debate in favor of the bill.
You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've enjoyed the debate today. It's a robust debate, and it's a debate that needs to happen in this body. What role does government play in the role of private business? Mr. Speaker, if I could ask unanimous consent to refer to other legislation, I don't know if it's passed but been talked about in this body.
Is there an objection? Hearing none, the gentleman may refer to other pieces of pending legislation.
You didn't hear the objection in front of me here, Mr. Speaker. She said, "You're killing me." Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, if you look at the EEOC, reasons why or reasons that businesses cannot discriminate against employees, each one of those has a story behind why businesses cannot discriminate against employees. Does a business have the right to force an employee to change their religious beliefs? We're arguing today that, boy, we don't want to get involved in that employer-employee relationship, that business should have the right to do whatever they want between them and their employees. Government at some point has stepped in and said, no, it's not right. Your religious belief is your personal religious belief, and employers can't discriminate against that. Should an employer have the right, or should a business have the right to hire only males or only females? The government has said absolutely not. Males have a right to a job, females have a right to a job, and you cannot discriminate based upon their sex. Well, why have we gotten involved in that employer-employee relationship? Because that situation has occurred in each one of those situations where the business was acting on their own interest and was discriminating against employees and not allowing them to have the opportunity to participate in a free market system. I guess maybe, Mr. Speaker, I don't know that you have to declare Rule 80 because I am a business owner. But just because I own a business, it does not mean that I own my employees. I do not own my employees. It is a privilege to have those employees work for me, nor do I own their medical decisions. That's a decision that is between that employee and their doctor. I think we had legislation, I believe it was earlier this year, where this body discussed and talked about that an employer cannot ask about the criminal history of an individual, a potential hire, because those people are getting discriminated against, because they can't even get past the first phase of employment because they've got a criminal history. It's good legislation. I think this body was in favor of it. Overtime or hours that an employee can work, etc. There are times when government has a compelling interest to insert itself in between that employer and that employee relationship. And I think this is the time where government has the right to insert itself and say, you cannot tell your employees that they are slaves and that they're going to be treated like slaves, and in order to work in my shop, you're going to have to go against your religious beliefs, your medical beliefs.
Mr. Speaker, I object. I think we're getting off base.
I hear what the lady's saying, and I believe the gentleman hears it as well. So you're painting with a fairly large, broad brush there, and so narrow it up, just do the details, and proceed, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't believe, it's my personal belief, I don't have a right to tell my employees what substances they can put in their body in order to work at my shop. That is a decision that lies between them and their doctor. So I believe this is an appropriate place for government to insert itself again and say to the employer, look, you've crossed the line here. You can't do it. The good lady from District 18, a friend of mine who referenced, why does the legislation not have provisions for healthcare workers or federal employees? Simple. It's a Supreme Court ruling. He said you can't. He said the businesses aren't supposed to. The Supreme Court actually already ruled on this issue and said you can't do this, except in those two instances, those that work in healthcare facilities and those that are federal contractors. So, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate what the good gentleman is trying to do here. I think that we need to stand with the employees of the state of Idaho and tell employers, look, it's probably a bridge too far. Just like these areas of discrimination based on your religious beliefs, your sex, age, etc., this is another one. Vaccination is not something that you should be a condition of employment. So I ask for your green light. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there further debate? Good gentleman from 5.
Just to declare Rule 80.
Your declaration under Rule 80 will be noted in the Journal. Good lady from District 23.
Potential conflict under Rule 80.
Well, go ahead. Lady from 6.
Yes, I'm sorry, potential conflict, Rule 80.
Rule 80. Gentleman 29. Gentleman from 10.
To debate a second time.
Does anyone wish to debate the bill for the first time? Lady from 11.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just briefly, after a couple of years of seeing how these mandates and restrictions have negatively affected people, I've had the opportunity to speak to probably hundreds now of people around our state that have been negatively impacted by what's happening, to the point where they're very concerned about what's going to happen with their health if they're coerced or forced to take this type of shot. It concerns me greatly when people start feeling like they're slaves or animals and they don't have a choice in decisions about what's happening with their body.
Mr. Speaker, I object.
State your objection.
We're not slaves or animals.
So you've heard the lady's objection. Please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So this has negatively impacted people. When you have people that are losing their jobs, their livelihoods, are not able to support their families, have to move out of our state to be able to find work, we have a problem. And it is up to government to make those decisions. If I could ask for unanimous consent to refer to another piece of legislation.
Without objection.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We do have pieces of legislation that have been going through this body and across the floor over the last couple of years in relation to how businesses must dictate and the things that they may bring into play to run their businesses or to have their employees participate in. We have passed legislation that requires certain businesses to do certain things in order to be able to function, and we regulate them. This is not something that we want to be going down this road. If we continue down this path, who knows where it's going to end and what we may be asking people to do next in order to be able to work and provide for their families. So I appreciate this legislation. I am going to support this legislation, and I'm going to support the people of Idaho. Thank you.
Is there further debate? For the first time. No from 10 for the first. Lady from 9.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to remind all of us we have taken an oath to freedom and protecting the individual, not to protecting business. And all these arguments that I have heard these last 2 years about how this mandate protects business is a false one. We have seen businesses lose valuable employees. There are employees with 30 years experience that chose to protect themselves instead of staying there, whether it's a federal employee, a health employee of any kind. And I know the good gentleman from 29 did not mean to insinuate that any healthcare worker in Idaho would come to work sick, knowing they were sick, especially to a chemo unit. I'm a cancer survivor. I know how much those nurses care and love people. They would never intentionally do that. And we know many people who have been vaccinated, yet they still contract the virus. I am in support of this Bill of Freedom. Thank you.
Is there further debate? Good lady from 6.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was not going to get up and debate today. However, I feel that I need to. As a business owner myself, I do not want the government coming in and telling me how to deal with my employees. I have the opportunity to work with really wonderful people, and we're small enough that we can work together and figure these things out. Now, I represent in my district many very large employers with thousands of employees, and they did not mandate. They allowed their people to get tested. They paid for testing weekly, which cost them almost $40,000 a week to test all of their employees in their business across the country. And I appreciated that about that business, because they wanted to protect, because they knew in all of the employees that they had to protect those that were there that chose not to be vaccinated and those that chose to be vaccinated. I think about my children going to school, and all of us, that there are many vaccinations that we would not want our children to be subjected to the disease if nobody had the mumps vaccination, if nobody had measles, if nobody would have had to take a vaccination for smallpox. And again, this bill, and I really appreciate what the good gentleman from 7 is trying to accomplish, because I too, I'm torn, because I believe in personal rights, but I also believe that we cannot infringe on the rights of our employers, and in the fact that, not that I think they should discriminate, because they shouldn't, but I don't see that in our district. These large employers and small employers are working with their people. Some of you are obviously seeing other things. This is a very broad brush that says be vaccinated for a coronavirus. Do we know there are thousands of coronaviruses. There's, so it doesn't say COVID-19, it says a coronavirus. And I threw this out to some of my employers, and they said it's very broad. What happens if there's an outbreak of Ebola? What if there's another outbreak of smallpox? Do we allow people to come to work and say we're okay? So, I mean, those are some of the questions. It is a very broad. And then I go to the good gentleman behind me here who testified or made his comments aware from 11. When my mother was in a nursing home, and these people are all compromised. So you then say, no, you cannot come in unless you're vaccinated, because they didn't want another spread, because many people died. So that concerns me, and it concerns me of the homeowner who has their grandmother living with them, and a caregiver coming in that may or may not be vaccinated, and if they ask, they could be a criminal and criminalized and have to pay $1,000. So I think that this is a very wide brush that we need to be very careful, because we could be setting up ourselves for some real unintended challenges in the future. So for those reasons, I'm voting against the bill. Thank you.
Is there further debate? For the first time. Joan from 10 for the second.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd just like to clarify a few things. I know we're all getting hungry and possibly cranky and probably not changing our mind anyway, but as a fellow hangry member of this body, I'll be quick. There's some information that I wanted to push back on that's been shared from the floor here. I think that the good lady from 35 mentioned HIPAA. HIPAA doesn't apply to an employer-employee relationship. HIPAA applies to medical providers. The medical insurance billing and the information contained through the delivery of health care. It does not apply to other people. So even if you work for a health care provider, if it's not related to your actual treatment, it is not covered by HIPAA. HIPAA does not create any sort of individual right of recovery as to anybody other than any protection except for between you and your doctor and so forth. Secondly, the good lady from 31 mentioned, what if somebody medically has been advised they can't get the vaccine? Well, then the ADA would protect that individual. It would be federal law protecting the individual if it is a bona fide diagnosis. Whereas the ADA it'd be impossible to comply with the ADA. As I said before, the fact that you can't even ask about the status is a bridge too far. And finally, I don't believe that this exception covers things like home health care providers. And you look at it and you'd think so, but it says a person, organization, or entity employing healthcare professionals for the purposes of providing healthcare services. Well, if you go to that site in 415903 and you look at the definition of healthcare professional, you'll see that that's a licensed individual, an RN, nurse practitioner, somebody with a license. Well, our home health care workers, our paraprofessionals, aren't licensed. And most home health care companies that I'm aware of don't actually employ licensed health care professionals as a part of their structure. Healthcare services means services for the diagnosis, prevention, treatment, cure, or relief of a health condition, illness, injury, or disease. Again, I don't think that this carve-out for medical goes beyond just simply your doctor's office. So the example used by the good gentleman by 11 about somebody coming into the home as a home health care worker, I do not see this as exempting that. So we would be mandating that somebody accept somebody who may or may not be vaccinated, but you can't find out if they're not vaccinated. You can't even ask, so you can't take other precautions, even if you weren't, to hold that against them. Finally, the Idaho Human Rights Act generally exempts employers of 5 persons or less. This doesn't have that exemption. I'm mindful of people losing their livelihoods, but I'm also mindful that for thousands of Idahoans, their small business is their livelihood. And where there's no exception for the small employer who might have legitimate reasons or might personally have legitimate health reasons to want to know, or somebody in their home for whom they want to know, it seems to go too far. The FMLA law excludes employers of less than 20 employees. This has no such exception. I got a call on the floor asking me if I thought that a babysitter would qualify as an employee, and I said, like all good lawyers, it depends. But it's all about how much you direct that person's day. How much do you direct the day? If you just say, do this and I'm leaving, and you do it however you want, that's one thing. But the more you structure the schedule, the more you direct the specifics, the more you become the employer. And so I know that we need to pass a bill like this, but I know that we can be a bit more nuanced. We can be a bit more mindful of the unintended consequences of painting with too broad of a brush stroke. And so and finally, the good gentleman from 13 mentioned that this body considered legislation where we couldn't ask, where we told employers they couldn't ask about prior criminal history. This body did not approve that legislation. It died in my committee, badly, on the same principle that we should not get involved in the employer-employee relationship and dictate what can and can't be asked in the course of an interview. Thank you.
Is there further debate? For the second time?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, for the second time. I'd just
Have the
like to
floor.
address one aspect. The good gentleman from 10 referred to HIPAA, and while he's correct in the technicality that HIPAA laws apply to the dissemination of someone else's medical information, for instance, I am precluded from disseminating a patient's information. The predicate for the HIPAA law was based on the premise that our medical information is sacrosanct and it is something to be guarded and protected. And while it's technically not applicable in this case, I also believe it's inappropriate to use coercion, extortion to extract that sacrosanct private medical information, which is why I will continue to support the individual's rights to privacy and making their own health care decisions with consult of their provider.
Is there further debate? Lady from 31. For the
Mr.
second
Speaker.
time,
Yes, please.
have the floor.
I'll be very brief. As a primary sponsor of the Liability Immunity Act, which this body has strongly supported and recently unanimously renewed for another year, I think it's important to remember that we have stood strongly in support of our business community and their opportunity to remain open and to not have to be concerned about frivolous lawsuits related to the transmission of coronavirus, and that is the term that we used in that legislation. We acknowledge that a business owner can't control spread in every circumstance, and that is why we have stood by them with this particular piece of statute, which we have renewed. It seems that in that context, we also owe equal consideration to the concerns, interests, and rights of employees.
Is there further debate? Hearing none. Gentleman from 7, please stand and close the debate.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the debate. It was insightful and long. So I'll go as fast as I can to answer some of the questions. First, second page, lines 7 through 9, severe acute respiratory syndrome, coronavirus 2. This is specific to that coronavirus. Another question that came about was, it's my understanding, and I think it's widely accepted, that you can be fully vaccinated and still spread this virus. So the gentleman from 11's concern about immune compromised, that's a valid concern, but being vaccinated with this current vaccination does not stop you from spreading the disease. So that concern was addressed in my bill. There is no other vaccine currently that this bill addresses but that one. Another question was whether you have 1 employee or 100 employees. Your constitutional rights are not determined by how many people work for the company that you're at. And again, that's, to me, that's the core argument for this legislation, is where do we draw the line? What can businesses dictate to their employees that doesn't cross the line? We are the referee on this. I can't explain it any better than that. We have to make a choice here, and it's a tough choice, I understand that, but again, I think when it comes right down to choosing between the two, we have to default to the individual, because that's government's ultimate decision. Our ultimate responsibility is to default to the individual. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Debate is closed. The question before us is, shall House Bill number 581 pass the House? I know, well, let me take a quick. I know that there's people that are concerned about Rule 80, Subpart 3. Read that carefully. you're the business owners are a large class. I believe that you're covered by not declaring. So anyway, the clerk will unlock the machine and the members will record their votes on House Bill 581. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change his vote? The clerk will lock the machine. Are there pairs? There are not. And lock the machine and record the vote. The vote count shows 39 in favor with 29 against and 2 absent. House Bill number 581 is passed the House and will be transmitted to the Senate.